Good evening and welcome. I'm Wynn Kane, President of the League of Women Voters, Lake Forest, Lake Bluff area. We're delighted you could join us for this year's first hot topic discussion. Tonight's subject is the Iran nuclear agreement. We are very pleased that Lake Forest College is co-sponsoring this event with us. The League is a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse or support any political parties or candidates. The League does advocate and educate about major policy issues. We work at the national, state, and local level. Membership in the League is open to both men and women, and we offer a variety of activities throughout the year: voter registration, candidate debates, public programs, and discussion groups. If you're interested in public policy issues or being engaged in the political process, please think about joining us. We'd love to have you. There are membership brochures in the table in the back, or you can go to our website, www.lw-lflb.org, to get more information or follow us on Facebook. In March, we will be holding 2 candidate debates for the contested municipal races. Please watch for more information. Today's program is being videotaped, recorded by Lake Forest TV, and will be shown on Channel 17 and 19 in Lake Forest. It will be on our website and on YouTube. Our moderator this evening is Carol Gale. Carol is both our League's co-vice president of program and the college's director of community education, and she's also associate professor of history. I will now turn the meeting over to our moderator, Carol Gale. Carol?
Well, welcome to Lake Forest College. We're delighted to have you here. We have a program that was originated in some planning by Jean Brown of the League of Women Voters, who thought that all of us needed to know more about Iran, and particularly about the Iran nuclear agreement. And that is our topic today, this agreement between Iran and the 5 nations of the Security Council plus Germany, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan. We have 2 people with us to help us sort through all of this. We're going to set this up as a sort of informal discussion between them rather than a flat-out lecture. And at the end, we will have questions, and I'll tell you a little more about that in a minute. Our 2 participants are Jerome McDonnell, who many of you listen to loyally on, I think, from what you said to me. He has been with BEZ, Chicago's public radio station, since 1984, where he started as a producer. But in 1994, he took over as host of the daily international affairs program, Worldview. The program focuses on the news, but also features grassroots activists, development projects, and a dash of global culture. He's been doing occasional segments with our other speaker, Ahmed Sadri, about Iran for more than a decade. Jerome believes broadcasting's highest calling is to bring people together to make a difference. Listening to his show makes it clear that he sees his own work as a calling too. And our second speaker is the college's own Ahmed Sadri, professor of sociology and the James Gorder Chair of Islamic World Studies. Born in Iran, he was educated at the University of Tehran and earned his doctorate from the New School for Social Research in New York City. His scholarship has a wide sweep. It ranges from books on modern sociology, particularly the work of Max Weber, to 3 books in Persian. He has also translated books from Persian and Arabic, including Reason, Freedom, and Democracy in Islam, and a book on Saddam City. He has also written more than 100 articles and functioned as a columnist for Daily Star of Lebanon, and also a commentator on the BBC, Al Jazeera, and National Public Radio. And he's also written a weekly column for a reformist paper in Iran, which was closed down, has been closed down since the disputed election of President Ahmadinejad in June 2009. But he's also got an artistic side, and he has translated an epic of the Persian kings, which has sold thousands of copies, 15,000 copies, and is being turned into a shadow play that will be presented at the Chicago International Puppet Festival at the end of this month, January 26th to 29th. So I'd like to welcome both of our speakers or our conversationalists to deal with this topic of understanding Iran and understanding the nuclear agreement in light particularly of the 2016 election. Ahmed and Jerome.
Hi, it's nice to be here. Ahmed reminded me the last time I was here was almost 20 years ago, which gets a little scary when you don't come back for 20 years. It's, I don't know, it's like I'm not wanted. What was the deal? Did I screw it up the last time? So I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad to be talking about the Iran nuclear deal, as we call it in parlance. I've been doing a bunch of interviews over the last week or so about President Obama's legacy, and there isn't a person who comes on who doesn't think that the Iran nuclear deal wasn't his boldest foreign policy gambit. This was his biggest, most difficult thing, and if you look at how Congress reacted to it, and it barely squeaked through a congressional review, this was controversial, and I still don't think a lot of people really understand it. It is so complicated. The deal itself is 150 pages long, and we're going to start a little bit at the beginning and give a little bit of a framework about nuclear issues, and then start working the agreement in. And Ahmed, we're going to talk about the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, God help us. It is the overarching agreement that 190 countries have agreed to. And tell us a little about the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement and how its theory kind of is important here.
Good evening. I might as well start before talking about NPT with my own biography insofar as it sprawls into the negotiations. When the final round of negotiations were going on in Geneva, I was in Tehran, not voluntarily. I had been arrested after my stay in Iran, and I was being interrogated, sometimes blindfolded, sometimes not, at the Evin prison, and there was no hope that there was no way of telling when I would be released. And I'm greatly indebted to Lake Forest College for supporting me in that period, and also for lobbying for my release. I didn't make it public for reasons that I won't go into it, but there was private diplomacy going on, and the American nuclear team, Secretary Kerry and Wendy Sherman both, did make the point to the Iranian side that I should be released. And I heard from that side of how the Iranian negotiator Javad Zarif, who is an old friend of mine actually, was surprised to hear that I had such high advocates in the American government. I didn't make it public partly because there are a lot of detractors on both sides. And you will be surprised how similar the detractors, the ones who don't like this deal, how similar their rhetoric and their way of approaching is. Both sides would have loved to use any excuse to put sand in the gears of this agreement. So one of the reasons I didn't make it public was that I didn't want to contribute to stymieing this deal that fortunately finally went through and was narrowly accepted by the Congress. Now, going back to the question of Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, this was an international agreement that was formed between 1968 and 1970, and eventually almost everybody joined in. 191 countries joined in. There are only 4 countries in the world that didn't sign on to this, and I'm sure many of you know who they are. India, Pakistan, Israel. Any guess who is the 4th one? No.
South Sudan.
South Sudan, 2011. Actually, North Korea did sign in, but finally was in non-compliance and finally left it in 2003. South Sudan apparently talk about nuclear ambitions. Guess who has nuclear ambitions? South Sudan, that has refused to sign this agreement. So it is widely accepted, and the idea was we should stop proliferating. We should stop making new nuclear countries. And this was an ingenious idea, originated at the United Nations. The 5 members of permanent members of the Security Council, who happen to be also the 5 countries in the world that possessed nuclear weapons, in one case had used nuclear weapons. So they came together and they said, gee, it would be a good idea to get other countries not to make these weapons because we know how dangerous these weapons are. We have them, and we know what they can do. Let us help other countries not to develop these nuclear weapons. So they brought everybody into the tent, and the argument was, we will help you develop your nuclear technology. In return, you should pledge not to develop nuclear weapons. Nuclear technology is a good thing. It has a lot of uses, and we will help you develop your peaceful nuclear technology. In return, we all want from you is one thing: don't weaponize. And if you make this pledge, then we can cooperate in nuclear matters, and we will teach you, actually, how to develop your nuclear technology.
And this was based on something the United States had developed called Atoms for Peace. It was a program where the U.S. was going to share nuclear technology with its allies, and Eisenhower was doing this, and one of the allies was Iran. There was just a few countries, 3 or 4, but the deal was basically the same. We'll help you develop as long as you don't develop a bomb.
Exactly. So actually this brings me back to decades and decades ago. I won't say how many. But when I was in high school in Tehran, I remember there was a fair, an international fair in Tehran, very popular with high school students because each nation would have a pavilion. And you would go from pavilion to pavilion, from India to England to Norway, and each pavilion was built differently. And you can imagine as high school students how much fun that is. We would go to these and they would give us little gifts and pamphlets and things like that. The most popular one was the American pavilion. And it was built in the shape of an atomic reactor with the dome and everything. And as you walked in, they would give you these aprons and these protective, ersatz protective clothing that now you're entering into the core, and they would allow you to manipulate these nuclear material with these mechanical hands. The point is the United States was pushing Iran to go nuclear, and in that process they gave Iran the first plutonium nuclear reactor that still is in operation. It was not that far from my house. It was a research facility, but the United States, especially under Nixon administration, pushed Iran to go nuclear.
And the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has something in it called the Additional Protocol, which became an issue with the Iranian deal. And not all the countries sign up for it, but it's over 100. I think it's around 120 or so. And the additional protocol is more inspections and everything. And that's something that will be a factor here. And I also want to mention that the deal that the countries, all the countries who sign up for this who don't have nuclear weapons, what they're supposed to get in return is disarmament from the 5 countries that did. They were supposed to get disarmament to the point of 0. That's what the treaty is all about, is going to no nuclear weapons. And the 5 nuclear countries don't have an easy time of that. They don't do that, and they try to make token gestures or smaller arms control agreements and say, well, here, we're making progress.
Well, NPT had 3 pillars, so to speak. The word pillar is not mentioned in it, but everybody refers to it as the 3 pillars. The first was non-proliferation, the second was disarmament, and the third was the peaceful use of nuclear energy. The non-proliferation aspect of NPT has been enormously successful. In 1970, they were predicting that within 20 years, that is by 1990s, there would be 25 to 30 additional countries with nuclear weapons. Thank God that didn't happen because of NPT. These countries came in and they signed the treaty and they got the agreement that, imagine like countries that are in the same region, if all of them are joining, they know that the other countries, the neighbors, are not going to develop nuclear weapons, so they all sign in. And this has been enormously successful. Now, more than 40 years later, we only have 5 additional countries with nuclear weapons, and 4 of them were the ones that were among the first 5 that didn't sign on. The first 4 that didn't sign on plus 1. So basically, it has been enormously successful. On the other hand, the NPT argued that the 5 countries who had nuclear weapons, also known as the nuclear club. Okay, so I think the nuclear club, it's not the formal name, but it is a very fitting name. Those of you who have been in clubs, in exclusive clubs, you know, club, an exclusive club, depends on its doors. You can't allow everybody in. The clubs, this is an exclusive club. The idea, the argument is nuclear weapons are so bad. Shedding crocodile tears. This is dangerous, atomic war is bad, and we don't want it, and you don't develop it, and we will be, who have had it, we are going to reduce all the way to 0. There has been never any meaningful reductions. The nuclear club members, since get-go, they have made make some gestures toward the disarmament, but the nuclear weapons we have now 22,000 nuclear warheads, and we have come this close to nuclear accidents several times during the Cuban Missile Crisis, during the presidency of President Yeltsin in Russia. Nuclear accidents could happen, but the nuclear club members are all not only not disarming, they are weaponizing, they are modernizing, they are building better and more efficient and much more dangerously smaller nuclear weapons that are much more likely to be used. So the non-nuclear members are complaining that the nuclear club members have not kept their part of the bargain.
Well, let's try to work Iran into this. So Iran's had nuclear scientists and technology and knowledge all the way up till the revolution. What happens during the revolution? Does anything change during the revolution? What happens to the Iranian nuclear situation?
Well, everything happened during the revolution. Iran's alliances changed. Iran went from the gendarme of of the United States in the region to its number one enemy. And so all of a sudden the fear was that Iran might develop its nuclear weapons. And this was not a concern because Iran got embroiled in a devastating war with Iraq. Iran was attacked and spent 8 years in a terrible war in which Iran was attacked by weapons of mass destruction, by chemical weapons to devastating effect. And all the indications are that the Americans knew about this, and actually in many cases they helped Iraqis cover up their tracks after the use of these chemical weapons. There was in Iran grumblings of developing nuclear weapons as a deterrence against this kind of incursion, mostly against Arab neighbors. And because of this, there was some suspicion that Iran may be developing nuclear weapons for the same reason that everybody else had. That is deterrence. And so the scrutiny really started to increase as we got close to the turn of the century. By the time 2003 rolled in, there was great international attention on Iran.
And the whole neighborhood there's lots of nuclear players. Israel's there, Pakistan's there, India's there, and Saudi Arabia is seen as a rival, and they have they're buying enormous conventional resources from the United States. So I imagine those defense people in Iran who argued for nuclear weapons had something to go on there. They've got quite a bit, other than the Iran-Iraq war. They've got a lot of argument there.
Yeah, I think that would be a good segue to talk about the right wing in Iran that opposes the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, this recent agreement. Their arguments really start right there. Nuclear weapons are a deterrent. If they work for Americans, for the British, for the French, for the Russians, it will work for us. They are not going to use it, and we won't use it either. But it would be a good thing to have these nuclear weapons. Look at what happened to Libya. They gave up their nuclear technology, and then Libya is where it is today, a hole in the ground, dominated by half a dozen terrorist organizations. Look at what happened to North Korea. Nothing. They had nuclear weapons, and it protected them. There is a character in Iran, somebody who, let's say, he's not very psychologically balanced. His name is Hassan Abbasi, and he styles himself as the Kissinger of Iran. And he argues that Iran should have nuclear weapons. And it's not only that. I know somebody who is much more like, I don't know, David Brooks of Iran, or something like somebody who has a great, like equivalent of New York Review of Books in Iran. And also somebody I know, in whose magazine I have published, Hossein Dehbashi, and he argues also, he's a reformer, he also argues that we made a mistake and we should not have signed this agreement. The right wing in Iran starts there and says we need nuclear weapons for protection against the enemies such as Iraq, and we need to have these weapons, and besides, we can never conclude an agreement with Americans because Americans are untrustworthy. They are not, we can't trust them. They will renege, they will violate, and they will cheat us. There is a great deal of suspicion of mendacity on the part of the United States. So the right wing in Iran, their arguments are exactly the mirror image of the argument of right wing in the United States. We can't trust them. You fill in the blank with Americans or Iranians. And so anybody who signs an agreement is either a fool or a traitor. And both of those accusations have been thrown both at President Obama and President Rouhani in Iran. So there are detractors on both sides, and their they can actually send each other their position papers and talking points, and nothing will change.
And what about the people who wanted to cut a deal in Iran? I imagine, from everything I read, everybody thought Iran had the right to nuclear technology because of the things we've been describing, and they had a right to build nuclear reactors if they wanted to, as much as anybody else who signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They all had the right to have access to nuclear technology.
Well, what happened in Iran, and here is where Iranian right wing, I think, has more to go by than the American right wing. Iranians are saying we are being unfairly treated. Other signatories of NPT are not subject to these kind of requirements, that they should not enrich uranium. You enrich uranium in order to operate your nuclear reactors. Iran does need nuclear technology because the fossil fuels are terribly polluting. If you go to Tehran, and many people from Lake Forest I've met half a dozen people from Lake Forest who have been to Iran. And if you go to Tehran, the air cannot be breathed. In many days, you can't leave your house because of how polluted it is. And the oil is also petering out. 15, 20 years down the road, there will be no more oil. So Iran does need nuclear technology as a bridge to cleaner technology, like everywhere else in the world. We have clean technology on the horizon, but in order to get there, to transition from fossil fuel to wind and solar, you need a bridge, and nuclear is the cleanest way to get there. Now even most environmentalists agree, the ones who are very adamantly against nuclear energy. So Iran has every right under the NPT and every reason as a sovereign nation to make this choice. But Iran is now came under these international sanctions, and they became so intolerable that Iranians finally agreed to give away some of the rights that they had under NPT.
What were maybe we should mention the things that Iran was doing that made the United States and other countries suspicious, because they did things and tried to hide elements of their nuclear program, and people who were in the non-proliferation trade say the Achilles heel of the whole non-proliferation deal and the whole agreement and the whole thing is enrichment facilities. You need them for domestic purposes, and you can turn them into material for a bomb too, and that's the Achilles heel of the deal. And the Iranians hit a uranium enrichment facility.
Okay, now here is when the rubber meets the road. The Iranians did have enrichment facilities. They got some of this probably from North Korea. Probably they got it actually from Pakistan, and they got it in a secret way. And they did hide it. Surprise. What country doesn't hide its nuclear technology? Can you walk into any reactor in America and say, hey, I'm here for a visit. I want to see what you're doing. What weapons have you developed lately? What are your advances? States, as Max Weber knew very well, love secrecy. And they hide stuff that even doesn't need hiding, right? State secrecy is like a big juggernaut. The state, this bureaucracy by its nature, loves to hide stuff. Now with nuclear technology, it is the kind of thing that you most want to hide. Recently, the Americans asked the Brazilians whether we could come with the international agencies and take a look at your nuclear facilities, because it looks very, very suspicious what you're doing. And Brazilians said whatever the Portuguese equivalent of "No way, Jose" is. It probably is "No way, Jose." They said, no, we won't allow you. And you know why? Because we are afraid of industrial espionage. We don't want to allow anybody in our nuclear facilities. So yes, Iran has hidden its nuclear facilities and developments. Everybody has. Has this been in violation of NPT? Well, that's a matter of dispute. Iran did develop these technologies, but it was not in violation of the letter of the NPT. That is, under the NPT, every member country should announce its facilities 120 days before it's operational. And Iranians said this was not within that limit. So we were not under an obligation to report it. Finally, in 2003, IAEA, another one of those alphabet soup of this talk tonight, International Atomic Energy Agency, finally in 2003, they hit Iran with a document that said not that Iran has violated any specific aspect of NPT outright, but over the long period, it has been in non-compliance with various aspects. So it is not really a direct accusation that Iran has violated a particular thing. Here, there is a little bit here, a little bit there, and finally, the agreement was that the document accused Iran of not being entirely forthcoming. And from then on, two things started. International sanctions against Iran started, and the negotiations that finally bore fruit in 2013, 2016, they started back there, and it was kind of stop and go until eventually it succeeded last year. So negotiations and sanctions have been going on for more than a decade on this issue of compliance.
And in the United States and Israel took action, covert action, a variety of covert action. There was the Stuxnet event that made the, what do you call them, the uranium enrichment rotators, the rotating things, centrifuges, makes them blow up, it makes them, ruins them. And that way, people point to that now and say, well, that was the first lob in cyber warfare that was meaningful. And then there was the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists, 4 or 5. There was 4 killed, 5 attacked, something like that. And that happened too.
Yes, again, this is what the Iranian right wing is saying. Actually, not everybody who was attacked and killed was a nuclear scientist. Many of these were people working, low-level functionaries at these institutions, and completely innocent people who were assassinated in the streets of Tehran, most likely by agents of Mossad. So Iranian right wing is saying they are waging war against us. They are introducing malicious software, and destroying our research facilities. If anybody did that to England or to America or to Russia, that would be an act of war. And so what they are saying is that what are we doing negotiating with these people who are incorrigible and who are talking on by one side of their mouth, on the other side they are giving orders for these kinds of actions to happen. So this is all the ammunition that the right wing has used in Iran.
We've made a great case for Iran keeping their nuclear weapons or developing nuclear weapons so far. What was the reason why a lot of the leadership wanted to do a deal? What were the things that motivated them to give up their nuclear program, their weapons program?
Okay, so there are two parts to this question and I hope I don't forget to address both. First of all, does Iran really want a nuclear weapon? If you look at the neighborhood, you would think the right wing is right. Maybe Iran should have a deterrent bomb so it's not attacked again. It's a dangerous neighborhood, and they want to protect themselves. Even if you don't believe that Iran is going to use it aggressively, why would they not want a nuclear weapon? I don't think Iran wants a nuclear weapon, even the right wing. And the reason is very simple. Iran is militarily superior to countries around it, even with the enormous arsenal that Saudi Arabia is buying from the United States in the most advanced weapons. You know, military strength is like capitalism. Capitalism is not about having a lot of money, a lot of gold. Capitalism is having a lot of entrepreneurs, right? If you don't have the personnel, if you don't have the adventurous capitalists who make capital grow, you don't have capitalism that is more than skin deep. So basically, the Saudi Arabian great juggernaut of GWIS technology that they are buying from the Americans, 14 billion only last year, and they have not been able to, although they're carpet bombing Yemen, they have not made any advances because their personnel is not Saudi. They're mostly mercenaries. Iran is a real country there. It has always been. Saudi Arabia was invented in 1919. United Arab Emirates is 38 years old. All the countries around Iran. You go back 100 years, none of them were there. Iran has been there for 2,500 years. So Iran has a sense of identity of itself, and it has shown that it can stop an invader like Saddam Hussein that was backed by the entire Arab world, with the exception of Syria, and all the superpowers in the world, Russians, French, Americans. Iran stopped them. So the Iranian conventional superiority is what Iran doesn't want to lose. If Iran develops a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia will get one, and United Arab Emirates will get one, and Qatar will get one, and Oman will get one. There will be parity, mutually assured destruction. So in terms of its national security interest, even the cold calculation of people like Hassan Abbasi, of this Hobbesian calculation of strength talks and these peaceful intentions walk. Even if you want to look at it that way, Iran would not benefit from a nuclear weapon. But Iran would benefit from what they call latency. That is, when it is perceived internationally that Iran has gotten to a point that it can, if it wishes, develop a nuclear weapon. There are dozens of countries who have reached this stage. They don't have nuclear weapons. Japanese don't have nuclear weapons. South Koreans don't have nuclear weapons. Brazilians don't have nuclear weapons. But if they wished, they could produce one over a long weekend. This is what really concerned regional powers. That prestige. Not that Israelis never think that, it may be said in the propaganda for public consumption, oh, Iranians are going to bomb us and things like that, which is a ridiculous claim. But Israelis don't want to lose the prestige of being the only nuclear power in the region. And they don't want Iran to reach that latency. So this is what the real war is about. The real battle is about allowing Iran to basically develop until it gets to that point, as opposed to Iran not getting to that point. Some would say that Iran is already there. Iran already knows how to develop a nuclear weapon. So this is really the argument.
Is there an economic component you want to talk about?
What do you mean by it?
Is there a good economic reason for Iran to want the nuclear deal?
If
Donald Trump says we got ripped off, we're giving them $150 billion here and there, and we got ripped off. If we knew that they had a power equation and like that one you just described, where they're going to be the power, and do we really have to give them all this money?
Donald Trump does Iranians a lot of honor by calling them great negotiators. What he means by it is that if you go to an Iranian bazaar, don't be naive because you're going to lose your shirt. And he's right. If you go to an Iranian bazaar and some shopkeeper says, come here, my American friend, I have a deal for you today and only for you. Don't bite that. Just walk away. Yeah, but this is Iranians negotiated this deal under duress. And they have always been, whenever Iranians and Americans have met, first of all, when they met in Algeria to release the American hostages that were held in Iran, Iranians were completely cheated and lost everything. They didn't gain anything. The agreement, Algiers agreement, if you look at it, it looks like, taking candy from a child. It was so easy for Americans to get a better part of that deal. And in these negotiations, it wasn't only Americans, it was Security Council 5 plus Germany with all their nuclear scientists and all their lawyers, and they negotiated with Iran. And what did they get and what did they lose? They stopped Iranian plutonium route to a nuclear weapon. The only facility in Iran that could have done that had cement poured into its core, the Arak facility, and the low level enriched uranium of Iran was reduced by 98%. Whatever that Iran had was shipped out, and all of these have been confirmed. And Iran basically is now capable of producing basically symbolic levels of enrichment, and this is under 24/7 surveillance of cameras of IAEA, and Iran has agreed to let in observers, intrusive observers, the most intrusive regime of observations anywhere in the world. Iranians really didn't gain anything from this. The only thing that they gained was lessening the pain of the sanctions. What did the Americans lose? What did the international community lose? They lost nothing. They just had increased a lot of sanctions on Iran, and they decreased them. So this is a great deal for the international community, and it's really not a great deal for Iran. But I am in favor of this agreement because I think at this point this is a sign of this victory of the reformers in the government of Mr. Rouhani, and Rouhani's agenda, the man who came after Ahmadinejad, was normalization of Iran's relations with the world, and this is the greatest symbol of that normalization. So I don't understand when they say there could have been a better deal, when Mr. Netanyahu or Mr. Trump say there could have, Americans lost in this, somehow we could have made a better deal. I can't imagine a better deal until and unless you went to Iran, you defeated the country, and you imposed your own will on them and got some kind of an agreement from them. Iran was not militarily defeated, and this was a negotiation, and this was, in my view, from the American point of view, a great deal. From the P5+1 was not bamboozled in this. I think they made a great deal, and especially is much better for Americans and for the international community than it is for Iran.
What about the people who say, well, it's only a 10-year deal, and in 10 years, we're going to be right back where we started. They'll have a nuclear weapon, and we'll have sold them a bunch of Boeing jets in the meantime.
Okay, so let's start right there. 10 years. 10 years is something. 10 years already started. We already are beneficiaries of this deal. Even the most strident opponents of the deal in the region, the two nation states of Saudi Arabia and Israel, now they are not favoring dismantling this deal because everybody is heaving a sigh of relief that any possibility of Iranians breaking away and running and developing a nuclear weapon, it has been postponed by 10 years. Before, some people put it at months. Right now, this great character in Iranian politics, Hashemi Rafsanjani, the two-term president, died. And on Friday, I was on Jerome's program talking about this. Can you imagine if we didn't have this deal? The death of this one person would have robbed a lot of people in the region of sleep. What if some hothead right-winger like Hassan Abbasi comes and says, okay, let's run for it and let's develop a nuclear weapon? Nobody is talking about that anymore because that possibility has been taken off the map. Everybody is a lot easier imagining what Iranians might do because the ability to for doing those things have been taken away. For this 10 years, this is 10 years of intense observation, of intrusive inspections, of 24/7 monitoring of Iranian sites, and again, no deal could be without end. Whenever you make an international deal, it has a period, and besides, Iranian agreement to the additional protocol doesn't end with the 10 years. Iranians have agreed to intrusive inspections indefinitely. So I think, again, the limitation of this to 10 years is not a reason to call it a bad deal.
And the Fordo facility is a 15-year deal. The enrichment facility that really kicked the whole concern of the Obama administration into high gear is a 15-year deal.
Let me say something about Fordo. I was in Washington, D.C. in a round table with several people, including Ambassador Pickering, and an American congressman who has been going back and forth to Iran as part of the nuclear negotiations. And this is, the roundtable is available on the internet. And later on I talked to this congressman, and Republican congressman, and he said, I asked Iranians, why did you build this Fordo and you built it under a mountain? What is the point of building a nuclear facility under a mountain? And the Iranians laughed and said, you know why we built it under a mountain? Because you kept threatening to hit it with your weapons. And he says, well, I had nothing to say, because like when in this kind of environment, you say we are going to bomb you, we are going to hit you with a sledgehammer, which is a name, one of these cutesy names for these new generation of nuclear strategic tactical weapons. When you develop it, when you threaten somebody like that, then you're going to get them to react by hiding their facilities under mountains. So again, these facilities are all known. They're under surveillance, and some of them have different deals. For instance, Arak was nearly dismantled and was filled with, its core was filled with cement, but Fordo gets to have more. They basically negotiated on a number of centrifuges and things like that. And again, anybody who looks at 157 pages of this joint comprehensive agreement, plan of action, will see that they have looked at a lot of very important things in great detail. It was not, as Michael Flynn put it, it doesn't look like something that a high school student wrote. I invite you, it's online, I invite you to go and look at it. It is very detailed, and it was negotiated by the greatest legal and nuclear scientific minds that we have.
Donald Trump can get a better deal. That is one of the things he has said. It is there a renegotiation of this deal that can happen? Is that realistic?
Anything is possible, but I doubt it. Again, note that there is a great deal of opposition in Iran to this. And there are a lot of Iranian right-wingers who are waiting for the slightest excuse to walk away from this. And if they walk away from this, they really don't have to tear up, so to speak. They don't have to tear up the agreement. They basically can say to the world that we have held our side, the Americans reneged. Iranians won't lose anything. Already 29 countries who have started to deal in great ways economically with Iran, energy-wise and otherwise. Our own Boeing just signed a deal for $7 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And people are selling Iran stuff, and it's going on. American sanctions were just renewed, but the Iranian side really never expected American sanctions to be lifted. What was important for Iranians was the international sanctions, and they will remain lifted. And with what inducement can President Trump come and get Iranians to renegotiate, especially given the environment in Iran? I don't know how that would work, but I have my doubts.
What about people around Donald Trump? You mentioned Michael Flynn, and he's a huge opponent of the deal, and Mike Pompeo from the CIA is a huge opponent of the deal. They would like the U.S. to walk away from it. Do you worry about those people within the Trump administration getting the upper hand?
I do worry. I do worry a lot. I think there is a great animus against Iran. A lot of people who have made careers on Iranophobia. And it's exactly the same thing on the other side. If you know the Iranian political scene, there are politicians in Iran who have nothing to say except death to America. And there are a lot of people who basically have made a political career in opposing America, and there are people who have made a political career in opposing Iran. It is the easiest thing to do. The easiest thing in the world, easier than breathing, is to be anti-American in Iran and anti-Iranian in America. And there are a lot of people on both sides. And this is why this negotiation between Zarif and Kerry was really a great achievement, regardless of the worth of the agreement that they made. The very fact that they could sit together and conclude this agreement was a great achievement. A lot of taboos were broken. And Zarif and Rouhani really took great risks in doing this, as did Kerry and Obama. And ultimately, I think this is a triumph for normalization, for installing an eventuality where use of nuclear weapons could be a possibility. And hopefully for that other thing that we mentioned in the beginning and we have not come back to, disarmament. Disarmament is enormously important for every single breathing creature on this earth. And if we don't get the nuclear club members to really meaningfully reduce the threat of nuclear weapons, it doesn't matter that small rogue states will or will not get their hands on nuclear weapons. I think, it is my suspicion, I have no proof, I think President Obama got his Nobel Peace Prize because he talked about disarmament in the first months of his administration. He never went back on it, and he actually ended up modernizing the American arsenal. But even talking about nuclear disarmament at that level is a great stride forward. And it is my hope that we really, as citizens of the world, put pressure on every country in the world not to develop nuclear weapons, and if they have it, at least symbolically reduce it. There hasn't been even a symbolic reduction. The nuclear club members have been going at it, and they have been developing these terrible weapons. And this is the greatest problem that one of the greatest problems, right along with the environmental crisis that we have to tackle.
Do you want to go to questions? Sure. I want to ask about another criticism of the deal is that it frees Iran up to build up its army, its conventional weapons. It gives them a lot of money to pour into their military to do what's not in Syria and turns them loose with more money.
Well, that's a different issue. Iran is a sovereign state. Iran can do with its resources what it wants. So does every other country in the world, 196 countries in the world. Every one of them has sovereign rights to do with its money what it wants. But look at Iranian army. It is minuscule compared to every other army in the region. Iranians are not developing great weapons. They are not developing a big army. Iranian army has always been very weak and very small in comparison to its neighbors. Yes, Iran got some of its own money, $150 billion that they keep talking about. Mr. Trump talked about it. Oh, we gave Iran $150 billion. We didn't give Iran $150 billion. It was Iran's own money that was unfrozen, finally, as part of this deal. As I said, this deal was about lessening the pain. It wasn't like giving Iran anything. The pain of not having access to its own money was lifted, so Iran got some money. And where did that money go? Well, the Iranian state spent it the way any state decides, some for defense purposes, some for national security purposes, and some for other expenditures. I'm not defending Iranian posture anywhere in the world, but I'm saying insofar as this conversation is concerned, that should not be the concern of the international community. Iranians can do with the money what they are going to do with it. It definitely has not been the case that it was all put in aggressive purposes. Iran, the issue of Syria is a thorny issue and not for this conversation, but that is probably one of the expenditures for this money.
What are the reasons for the U.S. to stick to this? Is there an overwhelming argument that can be made to somebody in the Trump administration to say, well, this is really why you, the United States, have a pretty good deal here?
Well, I think the deal is pretty good, but that is not the reason to stick with it. The reason to stick with it is this, and I was prepared to make this deal, this proposition to Hillary Clinton, but now the same is true, whoever is in the office of presidency. This is really ultimately a trivial issue, the issue of non-proliferation in comparison to the bigger issue that is the future of Iran. Iran has an indigenous democracy movement. It almost took over in opposition to Ahmadinejad. And you saw the pictures, millions of people in the street. And Iranian population is young, and it is enormously pro-reform. It's enormously against this 10-15% of the right-wingers who are ruling Iran. And normalization helps democracy. The first bombs that drop in Iran will kill the democracy movement. The first attacks in Iran will destroy this indigenously secular movement in Iran. When the revolution happened, Iranians voted almost 98% for the Islamic Republic. If you make the same possibility of voting or participating in a referendum, that will be reduced from 98% to 8%. What has happened? What has happened is the almost 40 years of a fundamentalist regime. And so this is a great gain for the world, for the cause of secularism, for the cause of democracy and human rights, the indigenous affinity of the Iranian people for these modernist values. and that all will be destroyed with an attack on Iran, with an attempt to regime change. That is going to be lost. One last thing. The supreme leader of Iran may die. He is ill. He's 78 years old. And after he dies, there will be a succession. Any kind of toughening of the American position will strengthen the right wing. They are going to say, we told you so, the Americans are untrustworthy, and they are breaking the deal that they made with you. They have made a fool of the reformers, and this will help electing a very right-wing supreme leader. So I think that would be the main reason not to rock this boat and to allow this indigenous democracy movement, supported by the young people. The octogenarians who are ruling Iran are going to die sooner or later, and they can't help but be replaced by the next generation that is, without doubt, a lot more moderate. Any kind of a breaking of this deal will disrupt that process.
You want to hit the questions?
Thank you so much, both of you. It's very, very interesting. We have a question which asks, if the USA breaks the Iran nuclear deal, will the sanctions remain?
The international sanctions won't go back on. The other countries won't agree to it. Russia won't agree to it. China won't agree to it. Donald Trump is pro-nuclear agreement. Maybe he can whisper. I mean, Vladimir Putin is pro-nuclear agreement. Maybe he'll whisper in Donald Trump's ear, and we'll get to keep the nuclear agreement.
It's really, really very hard to read what Donald Trump is going to do, because he has said all kinds of things, and not all of them agree with each other. He said, at one point, he said, nuclear weapons are great, let everybody have one. He said that. And then he says, this has been a terrible deal. We have to rip it up the first day. And is he going to make a deal? Is he going to agree to this? Or is he going to, I mean, flip-flop even doesn't start to describe what he has done on this issue. And there is great uncertainty in terms of what he's going to do. But if he does rip up the agreement, so to speak, as Mike Pence put it, the international sanctions won't go back on. The American sanctions will remain. No surprise. The American sanctions will remain even if Americans don't rip it up. There is great resistance to any opening to Iran in the American Congress, for the same reason that the same politicians in the Iranian Congress, parliament, have the same majority. And so it will not be a great deal of change in sanctions.
And the U.S. sanctions that were on Iran before the nuclear deal are still on Iran.
Yes, they were all, they were renewed under President Obama for another 10 years. So there is no carrots there. This is part of the American law. They are not going to stop these sanctions. They may ease some things. For instance, the banking restrictions. A lot of the countries in the world, the banks are afraid to finance deals with Iran. Let's say if you want to send some drugs, sell drugs to Iran, you have to finance it through a bank. And the banks say, better safe than sorry, why should we be involved with Iran? Maybe Americans don't like it and they hit us, so they don't finance it. This led to a great shortage of drugs in Iran. A lot of people, some of the very prominent people, died who had all kinds of cancer. Cancer drugs became very, very expensive. And all kinds of drugs became expensive. So the Iranian populace really suffered under sanctions. The Iranian mafia, the right-wing mafia, became so rich beyond dreams of avarice. There is a man named Babak Zanjani who was given money to do oil deals, and something in the order of $9 billion has gone missing. So this is the kind of level of corruption that sanctions encourages. It punishes ordinary people, and it enriches a lot of unsavory people. They talk about smart sanctions. I would have to see one to believe in existence of such chimera. Sanctions will have their own effect in Iran. They will strengthen the right wing, weaken the democracy party, and shake the faith of Iranians in making peace with America, ordinary Iranian people. Those of you who have gone to Iran, I don't know whether you are here or not, Jean, who proposed this, is one of the people who has gone to Iran. They know how Iranians love Americans and love to get close to America. I'm yet to hear one story of an American who went to Iran and was not mobbed by this enormous welcoming attitude. All of that will be lost, and we will go back to square one.
And maybe people remember President Obama came into office and did this stunning no ruse address to the Iranian people, which he did every year at Iranian New Year's, and spoke to Iranian people directly, wished them a Happy New Year, their biggest holiday, and spoke a little Persian. Do you think that went over pretty well with people in Iran?
Yes, actually there has been a great deal of love for American presidents in Iran. You can't imagine how popular President Clinton was in Iran. He was never as popular in America as he was in Iran. Public opinion polls are not plentiful in Iran, but a few that were taken, of course, people who took those public opinion polls really suffered for them. They showed that Clinton was enormously popular in Iran, and Obama obviously was very popular. So we are going to see what will happen. I really don't know. Maybe Trump will make a gesture. Maybe he will not act on any of these things. He has a charming side. I watched yesterday on TV. He was, taking the role of a bellboy and a cleaner in his own hotel. He chats with people. Maybe he's possessed one of these days to be nice and make a gesture to Iranians. It is anybody's guess.
So we have a question that asks really two parts. Does Iran have missile delivery for nuclear or biological weapons, and or are they seeking to develop an international ballistic capacity?
They have medium-range missiles, right? They're getting better at it, and the United States has sanctioned Iran for its missile development. I don't think anybody would characterize them as real good at it, in the defense industry.
Well, again, defense, missile industry is another one of those prestige areas of defense industry. All over the world, you see the countries who are trying to pride themselves on their military-industrial complex. They go into missiles, and they eventually, again, one of those great symbolic feats is putting satellites in the orbit and sending, maybe drones on the surface of Mars or Moon. These are, now we know, these all have military applications. And so these countries who develop this missile technology, it may be all peaceful, but if they should want to, they could do bad things with these. Iran is developing its missile industry like every other country. But because it is Iran, they say, how do we know you don't want to put a nuclear weapon on top of this and hit Israel or hit London? I mean, these kinds of speculations can occur. Iranians can say the same thing. How do we know you're not going to do it? So, strictly speaking, all of this negotiation has been about nuclear weapons. The international community doesn't have any carte blanche to go, waltz into some missile factory in Iran, some military development in Iran and say, hey, what's up? What are you doing? This is not part of the negotiation. This is like any other country. It's a sovereign right of Iran to develop its conventional military. And so there is no international sanction on Iran's missile delivery. Again, you know, Iran is really an unusual case, and we had a real hothead for 2 terms, Ahmadinejad, the second term probably stolen, and he shut his mouth, and he said a lot of really unwise things, and got a lot of people really worried. But he's gone, and nobody talks like that anymore. And the conventional development of weapons in Iran is something that is going to go on.
And it's really hard to go from medium range to an intercontinental ballistic missile. That's really hard to do. I mean, obviously North Korea is trying right now, but they've been trying for decades, and they are, you know, they're not there.
Yes, and Iranians have been trying and failing also, even in medium range. But again, like, if Iranians are developing their conventional weapons, it's because they have been attacked in that neighborhood. They have been the objects of the most devastating weapons of mass destruction used by Iraq, and a use that was not stopped by the international community. Basically, the international community turned a blind eye and allowed Iraq to hit Iran with nuclear with chemical weapons. You know, it's a dangerous neighborhood. And despite all of this rhetoric of Iranian politicians against Israel, the real close enemy is the Islamic State, is the Sunni insurgency, is the terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda and as ISIS. These are the real enemies of Iran.
So I have a question that takes us back to something you talked about at the very end of your comments, Ahmed, and this is generational politics in Iran. The questioner mentions that we think about the differences in our own country between millennials and baby boomers and all of that. Are there differences between the younger Iranians and older Iranians, how they approach politics? And how will these differences influence Iranian politics in the years ahead?
Yes, half the population of Iran is under 35. It's a very, very young population. And the population, the new generations are not really sold on this Islamist rhetoric. That is a wave of the past. It is out of fashion. It also has produced nothing but misery, isolation for Iranians. They can't travel outside. Their economy has tanked. There are no job opportunities. They can't dress they want to dress. They can't listen to the music they want. There is constant interference in their personal lives. This is not what they want. And so there has been a growing dissatisfaction and unrest and restiveness in the young population of Iran. But that is not to say that the older generation is solidly against these reforms. Actually, the older generation has also changed. Iranians, when I said we went from 98% to 8%, it's not only because of the demographic pressures. People have changed. People who thought the Islamic Revolution would inaugurate heaven on earth, they have realized that that dream has turned into a nightmare. So there is generational politics, but that is not the only thing that is pushing the democracy movement. The other part of that is the utter failure of a fundamentalist, rigid state that claimed to have all the answers, that it was better, that more just than socialism and more prosperous than capitalism, that has not delivered on any of its promises.
It always struck me that the Obama administration was betting on young Iranians with the deal. They believe in a different Iran down the road, and I thought that was obvious from everything they did.
Absolutely. I think both Kerry and Zarif was very, very popular among the young people in Iran. And I monitor this very closely. I can no longer write in Iranian newspapers. All of those are shut down, and I myself was shut down. But I do monitor the young people in Iran, and they really enormously were supportive of this deal, and they still are very supportive of it. If it fails, if there is a perception that the reformers who signed on this deal and took the risk made a mistake and were fooled, this will be a great blow to the cause of reform in Iran, and there will be a great disenchantment with normalization, also with future peaceful relations with the United States.
So I'm taking this to a very different kind of topic the questioners have. There are a couple of questions here, and they both are about the money that was returned. One person listed as $50 billion, and both of them are questioning whether the Obama administration returned the cash or gave $150 billion, says another question, to Iran and reduced some of the pressure on Iranian assets in order to persuade Iran to stop their nuclear efforts. The other question suggests, were they passing on cash? Why did we pass on cash? They say that could be distributed to terrorists.
Okay. There has been some really funny cash deals. I think when we conquered Iraq, there was a whole 727 that was gutted. They took all of the seats out and they filled it with cash and sent it to Iraq. And this is in the book, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, who was like the guy who and I went to his talk at the University of Chicago, and this is what he said he did. They sent billions of dollars of cash in Iraq. It turns out that we don't know where it went. It disappeared. So there has been some funny deals with sending stacks of dollars to countries such as Iraq. In this case, it wasn't like that. It wasn't sent as stacks of cash in some plane. Like we see in spy movies. It was Iranian money that was frozen as a punishment as part of sanctions. When they agreed to loosen the sanctions, in exchange for Iran signing it, they said, okay, part of the carrot is we will unfreeze your own money. The money belonged to Iran to do what it wanted with it. We had stopped it. Now we unstopped it. Americans didn't give Iranians a single dime from the American treasury or American taxpayers' money. It was Iranian money that went to Iran. And what happened with this, again, there are economists who have tried to follow the money, so to speak, and see what happened with it. And most of it didn't go to these nefarious purposes. And they can track how money of that size can affect the economy. And there is no smoking gun that it was given to terrorists or things like that. And besides, I don't know what they mean by terrorist, who is a terrorist and who is not a terrorist. The Iranians in Syria were not on the side of terrorists. They were on the side of the government of Syria, of Bashar Assad, who was accused of war crimes and things like that. But after all, it was not a terrorist entity. The other side was that, supported by the allies of the United States, namely Saudi Arabia, they were the terrorists. They were the ISIS, they were the Al-Qaeda. These are the guys who were kicked out of Aleppo. And so the Iranians, if they had any money going, it would be going to the government of Syria, not to the terrorists.
Now, in the news, it was President Obama did withhold some of the money at one point while they were negotiating. Remind me if I'm remembering this correctly. A hostage release or something. He did kind of use it as leverage, and that seemed to give an opening to politicians to jump all over the deal and say, you know, he's buying this hostage out. This is, you know, this is craziness. Whereas it was the Iranians' money.
As someone who was I was not a hostage, but in a way, the Iranians kept me from coming back. I lost my semester at Lake Forest College, and they were not treating me very nicely. As somebody who was in that situation, I hope he did. I hope President Obama used his clout and used the negotiations to get American hostages out. What is wrong with that? You are negotiating, and as part of this, you say, okay, let our people go. I don't see anything. It's not a crime. You're a president of a country. You have citizens in another country. You're negotiating. As part of negotiation, you use this and you say, okay, you know, let somebody go. That is, I don't think that is really something untoward or something anybody should apologize for.
So I have one last question, and you gave me a segue sort of there in the middle. Please speak to why Iran backed Russian aggression in the Syrian crisis.
You have to jump in.
Okay. Well, Iran has had a vested interest with Russia in Syria for a long time. They've been allied with Bashar Assad. It works out great for them in helping Hezbollah and supplying Hezbollah. Iran has a lot of interests in Syria, and we're going to work to defend them, as Russia was going to work to defend their interests in Syria. Both these countries saw losing Bashar Assad and losing the government there as a big deal. And do you want to take a whack at it?
Yes, you know, Syria is a mess. Syrian government is an authoritarian government, far from democracy. Bashar Assad is no, you know, babe in the woods. He is a dictator, and he's using his power in order to keep his throne. It's a regular Arab autocracy. But who is on the other side? ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra. They are armed to the teeth and financed by Saudi Arabia, by Qatar, to overthrow an old rival in his own country. And so there is a war by proxy. The Iranians are backing Bashar Assad, and Saudis and the Qataris are backing Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That is what is going on there. And one of the greatest disservices to the representation of what was happening in Aleppo was that, oh, this is the, you know, government is against the citizens of Aleppo. Bashar Assad wasn't fighting the citizens, it was fighting the well-armed Al-Qaeda front, Jabhat al-Nusra, and it was fighting ISIS. This is what was happening, and eventually they prevailed. The Russians and Iranians were helping Bashar Assad. The Americans were helping a chimera known as the Free Army of Syria that didn't really exist. Whatever weapons we gave them ended up in the hands of the terrorists, of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. It is a terrible war. There has been war crimes committed by both sides. Citizens have greatly suffered, but it's not, you know, if you ask Russians, what are you doing in Syria, they will say we were invited by the legitimate government of Syria. What would Americans say? What would Turks say? What would any other person say? What would the Saudis say who are supporting terrorist organizations there? So it is a mess, and a lot of injustice has been done. But you know, as much as I hate Bashar Assad, compared to ISIS, I would hedge my bets with him. I would say, you know, he's better than Al Qaeda. He's better than Syria is better off now than it would be when it was turned into something like Libya, which is a hellhole, governed by terrorists. At least you have some semblance of government that is secular, that doesn't intend to ethnically cleanse and religiously massacre people of Syria, which is the agenda of the Islamists of ISIS and Al Qaeda in Syria.
Well, like the critics of Assad say that he's, you know, barrel bombed his own citizens indiscriminately to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of people.
Yes,
dead.
He has.
That seems as bad as terrorism.
I don't look. You know, Bashar Assad is a terrible man, and he has been completely careless. He had in bombing the people of Aleppo. This is, by the way, what the government of Iraq is not doing in Mosul. This is why it's taking so long to conquer Mosul, because the Iraqi government does not want to barrel bomb anybody on the other side of the river. That other side of the river, the western side of the river, is not taken because they are scrupulous. Assad is not scrupulous. He uses whatever weapons that he has in order to win. He is a terrible Machiavellian, in the negative sense of the word, leader, and he has learned this from his father. But look you know, again, let's compare ISIS to Bashar Assad. ISIS intends to ethnically cleanse, religiously massacre this whole population, get rid of Christians, get rid of Druze, get rid of Alawites, anybody, and get rid of any Sunnis who doesn't subscribe to his to their theology. And you know, Assad, at least, as long as you don't challenge his government, he's going to let you live. It's a Hobson's choice. It's a terrible. I hope I never have to make that choice, but it is a terrible situation, and the opposition of Assad on one side and citizens on the other side is misleading.
Which underlines again how complicated this neighborhood, as you call it, is. And I think I want to thank you both, Jerome McDonnell and Ahmed Sadri, for talking with us about the risks, the costs, and the benefits of the Iran nuclear deal, and to stress the fact that there may be more benefits than we sometimes recognize when we listen to some of the political debate. I thank you both for joining us in the name of the League of Women Voters and Lake Forest College. I'd like to thank you for your talk.